The dream was always the same. Julian, his smile as warm as the summer sun, holding a first edition of a book she'd only ever dreamed of touching. His scent, sandalwood and expensive cologne, was her favorite kind of safety. But tonight, the dream soured. The scent of sandalwood was choked by something else, something metallic and damp, like rust and old pennies. The cold wasn't the crisp air of their evening walks, but a deep seeping chill that settled in her bones. A growl rumbled through the dark, low and hungry, and it wasn't coming from the pages of a fantasy novel. This was the sound of a nightmare waking up. My eyes snapped open. This was not my apartment. Not the soft linen sheets and the familiar weight of Julian's arm around my waist. The surface beneath me was concrete, gritty, and unforgiving. The air was thick with the stench of decay and motor oil, a smell that clung to the back of my throat. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through my chest. My wrists and ankles burned with a strange, icy fire. I tried to sit up, but was yanked back by heavy chains, silver. They gleamed with a malevolent light in the single grime-covered bulb hanging from a distant ceiling. "Julian?" My voice was a raw croak, swallowed by the cavernous space. "Julian, where are you?" A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness across the room. My heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. It was him. His perfect silhouette, the bespoke suit he'd worn to dinner just hours ago, the confident set of his shoulders. Relief washed over me so intensely it made me dizzy. We'd been taken, kidnapped. But we were together. We would be okay. "Julian, thank God," I sobbed, tugging at the chains. "What's happening? Who are these people?" He stepped into the weak light, and the relief in my chest froze into a shard of ice. His face, the one I adored, the one I traced with my fingertips as he slept, was a mask of cold indifference. There was no fear in his eyes, no concern, only a chilling, calculated emptiness. He looked at me not as Kalia, his shy bookstore clerk, his secret love, but as one might look at an asset, a commodity. "Be quiet, Kalia," he said, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of the warmth I cherished. "You'll want to save your strength." The words didn't make sense. My mind scrambled to piece them together, to find the context, the joke, the misunderstanding. "What are you talking about? Julian, help me!" I rattled the silver chains, a desperate, clanking rhythm in the terrifying silence. The burning sensation intensified, a clean, sharp agony that felt unnatural. He took another step closer, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the filthy floor. He crouched down, not to comfort me, but to inspect the manacles. "Perfect," he murmured, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Pure silver. They spared no expense." "They?" I whispered, the horror finally beginning to dawn. "Julian, you did this?" He finally met my gaze, and in the cool gray of his eyes, I saw the truth. There was no fairy tale. There was no charming billionaire who had fallen for a simple girl. There was only a predator, and I had been his willing, idiotic prey. The man I loved, the man I had given every piece of myself to, had chained me in a derelict warehouse and was looking at me like I was an object he was about to sell. "It was never about you, Kalia," he said, his voice soft, which was somehow more cruel than a shout. "It was about what's in your blood, a secret you didn't even know you were keeping." He stood up, brushing a piece of dust from his trousers with a flick of his wrist. "My apologies for the deception. It was, however, necessary." A raw, broken sound tore from my throat, a sob of pure agony and betrayal. The pain in my wrist was nothing compared to the gaping wound he had just ripped open in my soul. Every shared laugh, every whispered secret, every tender touch, it was all a lie. A meticulously constructed cage to trap me. Heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Two figures emerged from the gloom. They were massive, broader and taller than any men I had ever seen. They moved with a predatory grace that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The animal smell I'd noticed earlier intensified, rolling off them in waves. A musky, feral scent of damp earth, pine, and blood. They weren't just men. My mind screamed it, a primal instinct I didn't know I possessed. They were something else. "Is this her?" one of them growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor. His eyes, a startling amber, scanned my body with a proprietary air that made my skin crawl. The last of the Solis line, Julian confirmed, his tone all business. Untouched, unawakened, exactly as promised. Solis? The name meant nothing to me. It was just another piece of this waking nightmare. The two men circled me slowly, like wolves inspecting a snared deer. I pressed myself back against the cold floor, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear. One of them reached out a hand, and I flinched violently. He chuckled, a guttural sound. "She's frightened," he sneered. "Hard to believe the sun worshippers could produce something so meek." "Her wolf is dormant," Julian said coolly. "Chained in silver, she's no more dangerous than a human, but her blood will sing for you once she's claimed. The power is there, latent." I was shaking uncontrollably now, the cold and the fear a brutal combination. Wolf, power, blood. The words swirled in my head, meaningless and terrifying. I was Kalia Varan. I arranged dusty hardbacks and recommended poetry to lonely old women. My biggest secret was that I sometimes read the last page of a book first. This was impossible. "The payment," Julian said, extending a hand. The first man grunted and produced a heavy leather pouch, tossing it to Julian, who caught it with practiced ease. He didn't even glance at me. The deal was done. I had been sold by the man I loved. For a bag of, what, gold? The amber-eyed man grinned, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. "A pleasure doing business with you, Thorn. The Alpha will be pleased." He turned his predatory gaze back to me. "Now for our prize." He reached for me and something inside me snapped. A guttural scream ripped from my lungs, raw and filled with every ounce of my betrayal and terror. It was a sound I didn't recognize, more animal than human, but it was cut short. The entire warehouse plunged into a sudden, oppressive silence. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure that made it hard to breathe. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees in a heartbeat. The two hulking men froze, their eyes wide with a fear that dwarfed my own. Even Julian, so cool and composed, went rigid, his knuckles white where he clutched the pouch. A new scent cut through the stench of the warehouse. It was clean and sharp, like a frozen forest after a storm. Ozone, ancient pine, and the cold, clear scent of winter itself. It was a scent of absolute authority. From the deepest shadows at the far end of the building, a figure emerged. He didn't walk so much as flow from the darkness, a being of pure, controlled power. He was taller than the other men, broader in the shoulders, clad in dark, practical clothing that did nothing to hide the lethal strength beneath. Moonlight from a high broken window caught the silver threading his dark hair at the temples, and traced the lines of a jagged scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. But it was his eyes that held the world captive. They were the color of a stormy sky, a piercing, intelligent gray that saw everything and missed nothing. They swept over the scene, the two buyers now bowing their heads in submission. Julian frozen in place like a statue, and finally me, a pathetic, chained mess on the floor. There was no sound, but a name echoed in the terrified minds of every creature in the room, a name spoken in whispers in the city I thought I knew. Alpha King, Raiden Kael. His gaze lingered on the two buyers, a flicker of contempt in their depths. "You poach on my land," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with a power that shook the very foundations of the building. It was the sound of mountains grinding together, of glaciers calving into a frozen sea. "You trade in flesh under my moon. Explain yourselves." The amber-eyed wolf trembled, not daring to meet the king's eyes. "Your Majesty, we were not aware this was your territory. An independent transaction. Everything under this sky is my territory," Raiden stated. The words an indisputable fact. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, and the wolves flinched back. "And this transaction is over. Leave the payment, and leave my city. If I ever sent you again, I will hang your hides from the city gates." Without a word, the two powerful creatures who had terrified me moments before scrambled away, melting back into the shadows like frightened dogs. The king's gaze then fell upon Julian. The air crackled with a new, dangerous energy. "Thorn," Raiden said, the name a blade of ice. "You have been busy." Julian finally found his voice, bowing his head in a gesture of respect that seemed utterly false. "Alpha King, I was merely securing a valuable asset for the pack." He gestured toward me. "Her lineage. I discovered it by chance. She is a solace. I thought to bring her before you. You thought to sell her to the highest bidder and claim you were acting in my name if you were caught, Raiden corrected him, his voice dangerously soft. He prowled closer, circling Julian, his movements the epitome of lethal grace. You are a liar and a traitor, and you brought this filth into my city. The king stopped directly in front of me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the intricate lines of the scar on his face. He smelled of power, of winter, of a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache. For the first time, he looked down, his stormy gray eyes locking onto mine, and the world stopped. It wasn't just a look, it was a collision. The air was stolen from my lungs. A jolt of pure energy, hot and electric, shot through my veins, so powerful it eclipsed the burning of the silver. The air around us seemed to shimmer. His scent filled my senses, overwhelming everything else, and it felt right. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been. I saw the shock register on his face. His granite control fractured for a single, breathtaking second. His pupils dilated, the stormy gray swallowed by a sudden, fathomless black. A low, rumbling growl started deep in his chest, a sound not of anger, but of raw, possessive shock. It was a sound that vibrated through my very soul, waking something dormant, something ancient and wild within me. His gaze flickered from my eyes to the silver chains binding me, and a fury I could not comprehend blazed in their depths. The king, the feared alpha of the city, the man who commanded monsters, looked at me, chained and broken on the floor, and his wolf, his very essence, spoke a single guttural word that sealed both our fates. Mine. The word hung in the frigid air, a physical thing with weight and teeth. Mine. It wasn't a word of love or tenderness. It was a raw, guttural claim of possession, ripped from the depths of a beast. It bypassed my ears and slammed directly into my soul, shaking loose a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. A terrifying, instinctual part of me, a part I never knew existed, heard that sound and felt settled, safe. The sheer lunacy of feeling safe in the presence of this terrifying man, this king of monsters, was drowned out by the primal resonance of that single, damning word. Raiden Kale's stormy eyes were still locked on me, but the fury in them was no longer a controlled burn. It was a raging inferno. His gaze dropped to the silver chains shackling my wrists and ankles, and the possessive growl in his chest deepened into a snarl of pure, murderous rage. The scent of ozone and winter sharpened, so potent it felt like breathing in lightning. He moved. It wasn't a walk. It was an explosion of contained violence. He didn't have a key, and he didn't seem to need one. Ignoring the silver manacles themselves, he gripped the thick iron bolts securing the chains to the concrete floor. His muscles bunched under his dark shirt, a breathtaking display of raw power. With a roar that was more wolf than man, he ripped the bolts from the floor. Concrete screamed and shattered, dust and debris flying as metal surrendered to flesh and will. He did it again with the other chain, the sound of destruction echoing through the vast, silent warehouse. I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He had freed me, but he hadn't touched me. He hadn't touched the silver. He kicked the heavy chains away with a booted foot, the clatter deafeningly loud. Julian, who had been frozen in place, finally seemed to find his voice. A desperate, placating tone that was pathetic to my newly opened ears. My king, I swear to you, I was bringing her to you. An offering. Her power will solidify your reign. Silence, Raiden bit out, not even gracing Julian with a glance. His entire universe had narrowed to me. The inferno in his eyes softened for a fraction of a second as he took in my trembling form. The torn dress from our dinner date that felt like a lifetime ago. The raw, red burns the silver had left on my skin. He took a step toward me. I flinched, pressing myself against the grimy wall. He stopped instantly, a muscle working in his scarred jaw. He was a king, a predator, and his mate? The word appeared in my mind, unbidden, terrifying. His mate was cowering from him like a beaten dog. The realization seemed to wound him in a way Julian's betrayal never could. Slowly, as if gentling a wild animal, he shrugged off his heavy, dark coat. The garment seemed to carry the scent of the night itself. He held it out, not coming any closer. It was an offering, a gesture. I stared at the coat, then at his unreadable face. My body was racked with shivers, the adrenaline beginning to fade. leaving behind a bone-deep cold and the stinging pain of my burns. Hesitantly, my limbs stiff and clumsy, I pushed myself to my feet. The world tilted violently. The trauma, the silver's poison, the sheer shock of it all crashed down on me. My knees buckled. I didn't hit the floor. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between us. One strong arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against a chest as hard as granite. My face was pressed into the fabric of his shirt, and I was enveloped in his scent. Winter and pine and something anciently wild. It was overwhelming, dizzying, and 1,000 times more potent than before. A jolt, white-hot and electric, shot through me at the contact. My dormant senses roared to life. I could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his heart against my cheek. I could feel the heat of his skin, the coiled power in his muscles. He held me for a moment, his grip firm, possessive, yet careful not to hurt me. He was supporting my weight entirely. Then, with his free hand, he draped the heavy coat over my shoulders. It fell around me like a shield, heavy and warm, saturated with his scent. It was a blatant act of marking, of claiming. In this world I was just beginning to understand, he had just thrown his banner over a conquered territory. Me. He finally turned his head, his stormy gaze falling upon Julian Thorne, with the full weight of his fury. "You put silver on her," Ryden said, his voice a low, lethal whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "You chained my mate and tried to sell her like cattle." Julian's face had gone ashen. "Mate?" he choked out, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. The perfect calculated plan had just imploded. He hadn't just brought a rare prize to the city, he had desecrated the king's fated. I didn't know. No one knew, how could I? "Your ignorance does not absolve you of your treason," Ryden snarled. He adjusted his grip on me slightly, pulling me more securely against his side. The gesture was clear. I was his to protect, and Julian was the threat. "You are a disease in my pack, Thorne, a rot of greed and ambition. You sought to use the blood of the Solis for your own gain, and in doing so, you laid hands on what is mine." He raised his voice slightly, a command that cut through the silence. "Verith." From the same shadows the king had emerged from, another man appeared. He was leaner than the king, with sharp, intelligent features and hair the color of sand. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his pause a calm and steady hazel, taking in the scene with a practiced glance. He bowed his head low. "Alpha." His gaze flickered to me, tucked against the king's side, and his eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his composure returned. He had understood the situation in an instant. "Strip him," Ryden commanded, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Take his properties, his accounts, his standing. He is no longer Thorne. He is nothing, and he is no longer welcome in the shadow of my throne. Cast him out, let the rogues and the wild packs of the barons have him." It was a death sentence, just a slower, more brutal one. Julian fell to his knees, the facade of the charming billionaire shattering completely, revealing the sniveling coward beneath. "No, my king, please, mercy, I have served you faithfully for decades." "Your service was a mask for your ambition," Ryden said coldly. He turned his back on the begging man, a final, damning dismissal. He guided me toward the exit, his arm a steel band around me. "Take him, Verith. I never want to smell his stench in my city again." Verith simply nodded. "It will be done." As the king led me away from the ruin of my past life, Julian's pleas faded behind us. We stepped out of the warehouse and into the cold night air. A sleek black car, so dark it seemed to absorb the light, was waiting, its engine silent. A guard I hadn't even seen opened the rear door. Ryden guided me inside before sliding in beside me. The space felt impossibly small, charged with his presence. His scent was all I could breathe. The car moved with a silent, powerful grace through the sleeping city. The streets I had walked every day, the familiar storefronts and glowing lights, looked alien to me now. A thin veneer of normalcy stretched over a world of savage, hidden truths. I hadn't spoken a word. I huddled in his coat, a small broken thing next to a force of nature, my mind a maelstrom of confusion and a strange burgeoning awareness. The wolf inside me, the one I never knew I had, was stirring. It recognized him, it knew him, and it wasn't afraid, but I, Kalia, was terrified. We drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the familiar downtown core and ascending a steep, winding road. We passed through a massive wrought iron gate, guarded by silent, imposing figures, and entered a private domain. At the top of the hill stood a building that was less a mansion and more a modern fortress of dark stone and black glass, a citadel that loomed over the city like a silent predator. The Spire, they called it, the heart of the king's power. Inside, the opulence was cold and stark. Polished black marble floors, towering ceilings, and vast windows showcasing a breathtaking panorama of the city lights below. It was beautiful and intimidating, a palace built for a king who valued power over comfort. Ryden led me through silent, cavernous hallways to a set of large wooden doors. He pushed them open, revealing a vast suite, a fireplace with dying embers, a massive bed, and a wall of glass overlooking the glittering expanse of his territory. He guided me to a large leather armchair near the hearth and gently pushed me down into it. For the first time since he'd touched me, he let me go. The loss of his heat was immediate and sharp. He stood before me, studying my face, his expression an unreadable mask of stone. The scars on his face seemed deeper in the dim light. "You are safe here," he stated. The words an order, not a comfort. "No one will harm you." He crouched down in front of me, his stormy eyes level with mine. The intensity of his gaze was like a physical weight. "What Julian said about the Solis line, what do you know of it?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "Nothing," I whispered, my voice raw. "My name is Kalia Varen. My parents died when I was young. I work in a bookstore. That's all I know." A flicker of something, pity, frustration, crossed his face. "Varen was your mother's name, a name to hide behind. Your father was the last true son of the Solis line. They were a pack of sun worshippers, they called them. Wolves whose power was tied to the dawn, rivals to the lunar authority of my ancestors for centuries. We thought they were all exterminated." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from my face. "Until now." His gaze dropped to my wrist, peeking out from the sleeve of his coat. The burns from the silver were an angry, ugly red. A low growl rumbled in his chest again, this one full of a pain that seemed to mirror my own. "The silver," he murmured. "It poisons us. It sears the wolf as much as the flesh." Before I could react, he captured my hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, engulfing my own. He gently pushed back the heavy sleeve of the coat, exposing the raw, blistered skin. I flinched, expecting a fresh wave of agony. But when his thumb stroked over the burn, there was no pain. Instead, a wave of warmth spread from his touch, a soothing golden heat that seeped into my skin, chasing away the icy fire of the silver. I stared, speechless, as a soft, ethereal light began to glow from where his skin met mine. It was a pale, silver-gold luminescence, pulsing in time with my frantic heartbeat. The angry red of the burn began to fade, the skin underneath knitting itself back together, leaving behind not a scar, but a faint shimmering mark, like a tattoo made of moonlight. It was an intricate swirl, a pattern that looked both like a stylized sun and a wolf's eye. My breath hitched. He hadn't healed me. He had marked me. He finally lifted his gaze from my wrist back to my eyes, his own glowing with a faint inner light. The king was gone, and for a fleeting moment, only the wolf remained, raw and possessive. "The moon has chosen," he said, his voice a low, rough growl that vibrated through my very bones. "There is no escape from this little wolf. Not for you, and not for me." My hand snapped back as if I'd touched a live wire. I scrambled away from him, the back of the leather armchair cold against my spine, my eyes wide with horror, fixed on the shimmering mark on my wrist. It wasn't just a pattern, it was alive. The pale, golden light pulsed with a rhythm that was not my own, a soft, steady beat against the frantic tattoo of my own terror. It felt alien, a brand of ownership seared into my very skin. "What did you do to me?" I whispered, the words trembling. I tried to rub it off, my fingers scraping uselessly against my skin. The light only seemed to glow brighter in response, a defiant, luminous stain. Ryden rose to his full, intimidating height, his face a mask of grim finality. The fleeting moment of shared connection, of raw instinct, was gone, replaced by the unyielding authority of the king. I did nothing, the bond did. It is a mark of the fated, it will not fade. The bond? I choked out a laugh, a hysterical, broken sound. There is no bond. You're a monster, a king of whatever you people are. I'm Kalia Varen. I sell books. This is a mistake, a nightmare. I was pleading now, not with him, but with reality itself, begging it to bend back into a shape I recognized. Your name is Kalia Solis Kamatat, he corrected, his voice flat and devoid of pity. And your life as Kalia Varen ended the moment Julian Thorne chained you in silver. The mention of his name was a physical blow. The nightmare wasn't just the monsters and the magic marks, it was the love that had been a lie. The foundation of my world hadn't just cracked. It had been a mirage all along. My gaze fell to the heavy coat still draped over my shoulders. His scent, winter and pine, clung to it, a constant, overwhelming reminder of my new reality. With a surge of defiance, I shrugged it off, letting it fall to the floor. The cold of the room instantly seeped back into my bones. But it was a clean cold, my own cold, not one borrowed from him. His eyes narrowed, a flash of Arctic frost in their depths. The rejection was a clear insult, and for a moment, I saw the predator beneath the king stir, angered by the defiance of its new possession. But he mastered it, his jaw tight. Denial will not serve you, he said, his voice low and strained. You are in my home. You are under my protection, and you are my mate. These are the only truths that matter now. Protection, I shot back, finding a sliver of strength in my anger. You talk about protection after I was sold by a man I trusted? One of your own wolves? This world of yours, this pack? It's a cage of predators, and you're just the biggest one. Before he could answer, a soft knock sounded at the door. Ryden's head snapped toward the sound, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Enter. The man he'd called Verith stepped into the room. His calm hazel eyes took in the scene, me huddled in the chair, the king's coat pooled on the floor between us, the palpable tension in the air. He gave nothing away, his expression neutral as he bowed his head to his alpha. My king, Varith began, his voice a quiet counterpoint to Ryden's rumbling power. Thorne has been dealt with. His assets are frozen. He is on his way to the Barrens. There was a slight hesitation. But word is already spreading. 2 Northern Ridge alphas were seen fleeing the territory. The guards at the gate scented a stranger with Thorne. And now, a new scent is in the spire. An unknown female. He paused, his gaze briefly, respectfully, flicking to me. They are asking questions. The elders will demand a council by sunrise. Ryden turned to face the vast window, his back to both of us. He stared out at the city lights, his kingdom, his domain. He was a king weighing the fate of his nation against the chaos of his own heart. Let them demand it. I will answer them when I am ready. They will not see it that way, Varith pressed gently. They will see a potential threat brought into the heart of our power. Forgive me, Alpha, but they will smell her bloodline. It may be faint, dormant, but it is there. A soulless heir, in your private chambers, unclaimed, uncollared. They will see it as a weakness, a challenge to the throne. Every word was a nail in the coffin of my old life. I was not a person, I was a bloodline, a scent, a political crisis wrapped in flesh and blood. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold the pieces of my identity together as they were systematically stripped away. She is not a threat, Ryden stated, his voice dangerously quiet. She is my bait. Varith's composure finally cracked. For a heartbeat, pure shock registered on his face. He looked from his king's rigid back to me, cowering in the chair, and the pieces clicked into place. The protective fury, the marking, the presence in his private suite. The shock was quickly replaced by a deep, troubled understanding. My king, Ryden, Varith said, his voice dropping lower, the tone shifting from that of a subordinate to a trusted friend. That makes it worse, 1,000 times worse. Your fated mate is the one soul in this world, whose very existence is a legitimate claim against your crown. The old laws, the ancient blood rivalries. The elders will never accept this. They will demand you set her aside, or eliminate the threat. The word eliminate hung in the air, cold and sharp as a blade. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched. Ryden turned from the window, and the look in his eyes was so savage, so utterly feral that Vareth took an involuntary step back. "Let them try," he snarled. "Let any one of them raise a hand or a voice against her, and I will tear down the council and salt the earth where they stood. She is mine. That is the only law they need to understand." He took a deep, steadying breath, reining in the wolf that was clawing for control. "Leave me, Vareth. Guard the door. No one enters. No one." Vareth held his alpha's gaze for a long moment, then bowed his head, a gesture of absolute loyalty. "As you command." He backed out of the room, the heavy doors closing with a soft, final click, sealing me inside with the king and his impossible choice. The silence that descended was heavier than before. It was filled with the unspoken truths Vareth had laid bare. I was a danger to him. My life put his throne at risk, and his possessive primal instinct to protect me was a declaration of war against his own people. He walked over to the fireplace and stoked the dying embers, his movements methodical, controlled. The flames leaped back to life, casting flickering shadows across the harsh angles of his face. He seemed to be wrestling with a beast inside himself, one far greater than just his wolf. The fight finally drained out of me, replaced by a wave of grief so profound it felt like drowning. The anger, the fear, it all dissolved into a single aching point of pain. Julian, the man who had read poetry to me in the park, who had kissed my forehead when he thought I was sleeping, who had made me believe in a happiness I never thought I deserved. It was all a lie, a cruel, elaborate performance. A single tear escaped, then another. A choked sob broke from my lips. I pressed my fist to my mouth, trying to stifle the sound, ashamed to show such weakness in front of this powerful, stone-faced man. But the dam had broken. The grief was a physical torrent, shaking my entire body. I curled into a ball in the massive chair, weeping for the ghost of a man I had loved, for the simple, quiet life that had been stolen from me, for the utter, terrifying loneliness of my new existence. I didn't hear him move. One moment he was by the fire, the next he was standing before me. I expected a harsh command to be silent, a sigh of impatience. Instead, he simply stood there, a silent, brooding mountain. The crackle of the fire was the only sound besides my own ragged breaths. When I finally risked a glance up at him, my vision blurred by tears, I saw an expression on his face I couldn't decipher. The harsh lines were softened by the firelight, and in the depths of his stormy eyes, there was a raw, aching turmoil. He looked at my tears not with annoyance, but with a pain that mirrored my own. His wolf, his soul, was connected to mine, and my agony was a poison in his veins. He crouched down again the same way he had in the warehouse. This time, there was no aggression, only a heavy stillness. He didn't touch me, he didn't speak. He just watched me cry, his presence a steady, unwavering anchor in my storm of sorrow. It was the strangest, most profound comfort I had ever known. He was not trying to fix it. He was simply bearing witness to it. After what felt like an eternity, my sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. He reached out, not for me, but for the coat on the floor. He picked it up and without a word, draped it back over my shoulders. This time, I didn't push it away. I was too cold, too exhausted. I huddled into its warmth, into his scent, and felt a traitorous flicker of safety. "He will suffer for every tear you shed," he said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. "That is my vow to you." He stood and walked to a small, concealed bar, pouring a glass of water. He brought it to me, his large, scarred hands steady as he offered it. My own hands were trembling too much to take it, so he held it to my lips. I drank, the cool water a balm on my raw throat. He took the empty glass and set it aside. The moment of quiet truce was over. His face hardened again, the king returning. "What Vareth said is true," he began, his tone all business. "You are in danger, not from me, but from those who fear what you represent." He paced before the fire, a caged wolf. "Your blood, the soulless power. It is a fire that has been dormant for generations." Julian was a fool. He saw only a prize to be sold. He had no idea how to ignite it. He stopped and turned to face me, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. "But it is waking up now. The shock, the silver, the proximity to your fated, all of it is a catalyst. Soon, The power in your veins, ends, will demand release. Release? I whispered, my voice hoarse. Your first shift, he said, the words landing like stones. The transformation, for a wolf of a common bloodline, it is a painful, disorienting rite of passage. For you, a solace, the last of your kind, whose power has been suppressed for a lifetime. It will be a cataclysm, a firestorm that will consume you from the inside out. My blood ran cold. The transformation, the final horrifying step into this monstrous new world. I won't, I said, shaking my head. A futile, childish denial. I won't let it. You have no choice, he stated, his voice absolute. The wolf is a part of you. It is you. And when it breaks free, it will be wild, terrified, and unbelievably powerful. It will not know friend from foe. It will lash out at anything that moves. Without an anchor, it will shatter your mind or burn out your body entirely. He took a deliberate step closer, his shadow falling over me. And there is only one thing that can anchor a wolf of your power during a first shift, he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl that vibrated through the very floorboards. A true alpha, its mate. His meaning was terrifyingly clear. To survive becoming this thing, this monster, I needed him. Utterly, completely. My survival was now chained to the very man who embodied this nightmare. The shift is coming, Kalia, he said, his stormy eyes locking onto mine, a promise and a threat in their depths. And when it does, you will have to choose. Burn to ashes alone, or be chained to me, chained to him. The words echoed in the oppressive silence of the suite. A perfect, brutal summary of my new existence. I had been torn from one cage, only to be thrust into another, gilded and far more dangerous. The choice he presented wasn't a choice at all. It was an ultimatum. Annihilation or submission. My life as I knew it was over, and the only path forward was through him. The cold, scarred king who looked at me with the possessive hunger of a wolf and the calculated gaze of a monarch, weighing a new, volatile piece on his chessboard. I stared into his stormy eyes, searching for a flicker of deception, of manipulation. I found none. Only a grim, terrible certainty. He believed every word he was saying. This first shift was real to him. A coming storm that he alone could see. The latent power, the Solis blood, it was no longer a fantastical story, but a ticking bomb strapped to my soul, and he was offering to be the one to disarm it. For a price, always for a price. Why? I finally managed to ask. My voice a dry rasp. Why would you help me? Vareth was right. I'm a threat to you, my bloodline. It challenges your throne. Wouldn't it be easier to just let me burn? The question hung between us, ugly and raw. It was the logical political move. The king's move. Eliminate the rival claimant, shore up his power, and be done with the complication. A muscle feathered in his jaw, the only sign of the internal conflict raging behind his granite facade. He turned away from me, pacing once more before the fire, the restless energy of a caged predator rolling off him in waves. Easier? He let out a short, harsh laugh, devoid of any humor. Yes, it would be infinitely easier. He stopped and faced me, his expression a conflict of raw instinct and iron control. But the bond between fated mates is not a matter of convenience. It is the oldest law, older than crowns, older than pacts, older than the divide between sun and moon. My wolf knows you. It recognized you the moment I saw you. To stand by and watch you be destroyed would be to tear out its own heart. And a king without his wolf, he finished, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, is merely a man waiting for a traitor's blade. His honesty was more disarming than any lie. He wasn't helping me out of kindness or compassion. He was helping me because his own survival, the very essence of his power, was now inextricably tangled with mine. I was his strength and his most profound weakness, all at once. He was as trapped by this bond as I was. So you'll anchor me, I said, the words tasting like ash. You'll save me from myself. And in return? In return, he said, his eyes blazing with a sudden possessive fire that made the air crackle. You will be mine, not just in name or in scent, but in truth. You will stand by my side, wear my mark, and accept your place as my Luna, the soulless heir, bound to the Kael Alpha, an alliance of blood and fate that will silence any challenge to my throne before it is ever spoken. Your power will be yoked to mine, strengthening my reign, not threatening it. There it was, the price, my freedom, my identity, my entire being, traded for survival. I would become a symbol, a queen, a possession, a beautiful, powerful chain to secure his crown. Before I could process the suffocating weight of his proposal, the doors to the suite opened without a knock. Vareth stood there, his face pale, his usual calm shattered. My king, forgive the intrusion, but you must come. It's the elders. They've convened the Blood Council. They are demanding an audience. Now. Raiden's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. They dare? They scented her on you when you returned, Vareth explained, his voice urgent. The rumor of a Solis heir is spreading like wildfire. They are afraid, Raiden, and their fear is making them bold. They are invoking the old rites. They demand you present the threat to them. They demand a judgment. A judgment. The word was a death knell. Stay here, Raiden commanded me, his voice leaving no room for argument. Do not leave this room. He strode toward the door, every inch the Alpha King preparing for battle. Wait, I called out, my voice thin but clear. I pushed myself out of the chair, his heavy coat sliding from my shoulders while Zin pulling at my feet. I stood before him in my torn, simple dress, a bookstore clerk facing a king, a lamb facing the butcher's council. Don't I get a say in this? It's Myliweth they're judging. He stopped and looked back at me, his gaze sweeping over my small, defiant form. A flicker of something, respect, surprise, crossed his features. Their judgment is irrelevant. I am their king. My word is law. And what is your word? I pressed, my heart hammering. Will you tell them the truth? That your fated mate is the one person who could destroy you? That you're gambling your entire kingdom on a broken girl who doesn't even know what she is? He strode back to me, closing the distance between us until he towered over me. His scent, sharp and clean and powerful, enveloped me. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek in a gesture that was shockingly gentle. His stormy eyes bored into mine, a silent communication passing between us that was deeper than words. It was a promise of violence, a vow of protection, a declaration of ownership. I will tell them, he said, his voice a low, rumbling promise that vibrated through his hand into my very bones. That they will address my Luna with the respect she is owed, or I will start the council by decorating the walls with their entrails. With that, he turned and swept from the room, Vareth at his heels. The doors boomed shut, leaving me alone in the vast, opulent cage. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the frantic beating of my own heart. He was going to fight his own counsel for me, for a woman he'd known for mere hours, a woman who carried the blood of his enemies. Not for me, I corrected myself. For his mate, for the other half of his soul, whether I wanted the title or not. I paced the room, a restless energy thrumming through my veins. A strange duality was at war within me. The human part, Kalia, was screaming. It wanted to run, to find a way out of this fortress, to disappear back into the anonymous, safe world of paper and ink. But another part of me, a deeper, more primal instinct, was stirring. The wolf. It wasn't afraid. It felt the threat from the elders, the challenge to its new, unasked-for territory, and it felt a low, rising growl of aggression. It recognized the alpha who had gone to fight for it, and it felt a fierce, possessive pull toward him. My gaze fell upon the wall of glass overlooking the city, my city. From up here, it was a tapestry of glittering lights, a silent, beautiful thing. I thought of my small apartment above the bookstore, the smell of old paper and brewing tea, the comfortable solitude of my quiet life. A wave of grief, sharp and poignant, washed over me. That girl was gone forever. Whether I burned in the fire of my first shift or became a queen on a throne of shadows, Kalia Varen, the shy clerk, was already dead. She had died in a warehouse, chained in silver by the man she loved. The mark on my wrist pulsed with a soft, golden light. It was a constant physical reminder of the bond, of the king, of the future he had laid out for me. I traced the intricate pattern with my finger. Sun and wolf's eye, fire and shadow, my heritage and his. An hour passed, then two. The fire burned low, and the city outside began to quiet. The silence in the suite stretched, becoming thin and brittle with tension. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the glass made me jump. I didn't know what was happening in this blood council, but I could feel the reverberations of it. A low, thrumming anger that seemed to shake the very foundations of the spire. It was his anger. I was feeling his rage. A distant echo through the bond. Suddenly, a searing pain shot up my arm, originating from the mark on my wrist. I cried out, clutching it. The golden light flared violently, becoming a brilliant, blinding white. It was no longer a gentle warmth, but a scorching heat, as if the sun itself had been branded into my skin. The pain was excruciating, a clean, white-hot agony that made the memory of the silver's burn feel like a dull ache. My knees gave out, and I crumpled to the floor, panting. The room began to swim, my senses sharpened to an unbearable degree. I could hear the individual heartbeats of the guards outside the door, a frantic, thrumming rhythm. I could smell the ozone in the air from a coming storm miles away, the scent of fear clinging to Vareth's clothes, the metallic tang of spilled blood from somewhere deep within the fortress. My own blood roared in my ears, a tidal wave of sensation that threatened to overwhelm me. The power he had spoken of. The firestorm. It wasn't coming. It was here. The doors to the suite burst open with a crash. Raiden stood there, his face a thunderous mask. There was a fresh cut on his cheek, a thin line of dark blood, and his knuckles were bruised. His stormy eyes, glowing with the full power of his wolf, found me on the floor. He was across the room in 2 long strides, kneeling beside me. "Kalia!" "It hurts," I gasped, cradling my arm. The mark was blazing now, the light so bright it cast dancing shadows on the walls. My bones felt like they were grinding together, my muscles twisting into knots. A low growl escaped my lips, a sound I didn't recognize, an animal sound of pure agony. He swore, a vicious, guttural sound. He looked at me, then at the blazing mark. The shift was starting, triggered by the stress, by the violence of the council, by the surge of his own alpha power through the bond. It was too soon. He wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared. "Breathe, Kalia," he commanded, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of pain. Look at me, focus on my voice. But I couldn't. The world was dissolving into a vortex of sound, scent, and agony. My vision blurred, the edges tinged with red. The wolf, the ancient, dormant, soulless power, was clawing its way out, tearing through the flimsy shell of my humanity. Raiden grabbed my shoulders, his grip like iron. "Listen to me, you have to fight it. Not for long, just until I can get us away from here." He glanced back at the open door, his jaw tight with fury. "The council chamber is not the place for this." He pulled me to my feet, half carrying me as my legs refused to cooperate. He was leading me, not back into the suite, but out, into the corridor. Vareth stood there, his sword drawn, a grim look on his face. Behind him, a handful of elders, their faces a mixture of fear and hostile triumph, watched us. They had gotten what they wanted. They had forced his hand. They had pushed the soulless heir into a premature, uncontrolled shift, hoping she would self-destruct, or that Raiden would be forced to kill her himself to contain the threat. "Seal the floor, Vareth," Raiden snarled over his shoulder. "No one gets up here. No one gets out." He pulled me along, down a different corridor, one of bare stone, leading deeper into the heart of the spire. The pain was a living thing now, a fire in my blood. A scream tore from my throat, but it was no longer human. It was the howl of a wolf, filled with terror and rage and a power I could not hope to contain. He kicked open a heavy iron door and dragged me inside, into a vast circular stone chamber. There were no windows, only a high domed ceiling. The air was cold and smelled of earth and old stone. In the center of the room, etched into the floor, was a complex circle of silver runes. "This is a shifting chamber," he grunted, forcing me toward the center top. "It will contain the blast, but it won't hold you for long." He pushed me into the center of the circle and then, to my horror, he stepped back, outside the silver line. "What are you doing?" I screamed, my voice a shredded mess. "The silver will block our bond," he explained, his voice strained with effort. "It will keep me from feeling the worst of this, keep me from shifting myself. I have to stay in control." I have to be your anchor when you break." He was leaving me alone in the fire. The pain reached its crescendo, my spine arched, a scream of pure, undiluted agony ripping from my lungs. My bones were breaking, reforming, my skin was tearing. The last thing I saw before the red haze consumed my vision was his face, a mask of stone and torment. His glowing gray eyes locked on mine as he stood on the other side of the silver, preparing to weather the storm he had claimed. The last thought of Caliavaran was a single, desperate plea. Don't let me die alone. Pain was the first reality, a universe of it. Not the clean burn of silver or the sharp betrayal of a lie, but a tectonic agony, a grinding of bone and a tearing of flesh from the inside out. My own skeleton became a cage, and something wild, something impossibly powerful, was breaking the bars. My screams were no longer my own. They were the raw, keening howls of a creature being born in a crucible of torment. The human part of me, the fragile consciousness of Kalia, was a tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane, about to be extinguished forever. I was vaguely aware of my body convulsing on the cold stone floor. The scent of my own blood, sharp and metallic, filled the chamber, mingling with the ancient smell of earth and rock. Through the red haze of agony, one thing remained: his scent. Winter and pine and absolute authority. It was a lighthouse in the storm, the only fixed point in a world dissolving into chaos. I couldn't see him past the glowing silver circle, but I could feel his presence, a steady, unyielding pressure against the storm of my transformation. He was the anchor, just as he'd promised. He was the mountain against which the tsunami of my power would break. The firestorm raged. Memories, sensations, instincts I had never known flooded the void where my thoughts used to be. The memory of running under a full moon, the wind a silken song in my fur, the taste of fresh blood, hot and vital, the deep rumbling growl of a pack, a chorus of belonging and strength, and something else, a different sense memory, the warmth of the sun on a golden pelt, the scent of summer grass, the feeling of a power that did not wax and wane with the moon, but rose with the dawn, fierce and constant. Solace. The memories of 1,000 ancestors screamed in my blood, demanding release, demanding recognition. The last of my human bones snapped and reformed. A final soul-shattering howl tore from my throat as the change completed itself, and then silence. The pain receded, leaving behind an exhausted, humming energy. My body felt new, strange, powerful. I opened my eyes. The world was a kaleidoscope of new information. The stone floor beneath my paws was a map of scents and textures. I could smell the fierce sweat of the men who had built this chamber centuries ago, the lingering ozone from Raiden's anger, the faint sweet scent of a spider spinning a web in a high crevice of the stone wall. My vision was sharper, the dim light of the chamber as clear as day, every crack in the stone, every speck of dust rendered in perfect detail. I lifted my head and saw my reflection in the polished surface of a silver rune. Staring back at me was a wolf, but not just any wolf. My fur was not the gray or black or brown of the pack wolves I had glimpsed. It was the color of pale spun gold, shimmering with an inner light, as if it had captured the first rays of dawn. My eyes were not the amber of the poachers or the stormy gray of the king. They were a bright, luminous gold, molten and alive. I was a creature of the sun, trapped in a stone chamber deep in the earth, claimed by a king of the moon. A low growl rumbled in my chest, a foreign yet deeply familiar sound. The wolf was awake, and it was afraid. It was trapped. The silver circle that contained me burned with a cold, hostile energy, an impassable barrier that chafed at my newfound instincts. Beyond the circle, Raiden stood unmoving, a statue of controlled power. His face was granite, but I could smell the truth of him. The scent of his arousal, sharp and musky, mingled with the clean scent of his control. He was watching me, his stormy eyes wide, pupils dilated to black pools. He was seeing not just a wolf, but a legend made flesh, the last of the Solis, his fated mate, his greatest threat and his most desired possession, all in one radiant, terrifying form. My wolfish instincts screamed at me, mate, alpha, mine. But the lingering terror of Kalia screamed louder, monster, cage, king. The two halves of my soul were at war, and the battlefield was my own mind. The wolf wanted to submit, to go to him, to feel the safety of his presence. The human wanted to tear him apart for what he had done, for what he represented. I bared my teeth, a snarl ripping from my throat. It was a sound of defiance, of terror, of a cornered animal preparing to fight for its life. Raiden didn't flinch. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the silver line. "Kalia," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble, testing the name on this new form. The sound of my name in his mouth was a spark on a trail of gunpowder. The wolf reacted with a surge of possessive fury. I launched myself at the silver circle, a blur of golden fur and snapping teeth. I hit the invisible barrier and was thrown back, a painful jolt of cold energy searing my paws. I landed in a heap, whining from the shock, a sound of frustration and pain. He stopped, holding his ground. He didn't show pity. He knew this was a battle not of strength but of will. He was waiting for the feral instincts to exhaust themselves, waiting for the flicker of the girl he'd met to reemerge. I rose again, my golden eyes locked on his. I began to pace the inside of the circle, my movements fluid, predatory. I was a caged sun, radiating a heat and a power that seemed to warp the air around me. This was the power the elders feared. This was the power Julian had tried to sell. It felt like a living thing inside me, a star in my chest, and I had no idea how to control it. "Easy, little wolf," he murmured, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through the stone. He wasn't speaking to the human, but to the beast. He was speaking its language. "You are not in danger. You are safe." My ears swiveled, tracking his voice. I let out another low, warning growl. He was my mate, yes, my alpha, but he was also my captor. The instincts were a tangled, contradictory mess. He slowly, deliberately crouched down, lowering his profile, making himself less of a threat. It was a gesture of respect in the wolf world, a king humbling himself before his queen. "The pain is over now, Captain," he continued, his voice calm, hypnotic. "The fire has passed. You are whole. You are magnificent." His words, the sheer unadorned reverence in his tone, chipped away at the wolf's feral panic. Magnificent? I was a monster, a creature of nightmare, but he didn't see that. He saw power, he saw beauty, he saw his. I stopped pacing. My head was cocked, my golden eyes studying him, trying to reconcile the king with the mate, the captor with the anchor. He remained perfectly still, a bastion of calm in my internal chaos. He was giving me the control, letting me make the next move. Slowly, hesitantly, I took a step toward the silver line, then another. The wolf's instinct to be near its mate was beginning to overpower the human's fear. I stopped just short of the barrier, the cold energy of the silver raising the fur along my spine. I lowered my head, sniffing the air, taking in the full, unadulterated scent of him. It was the most comforting, most maddening scent I had ever known. It smelled like home, and it smelled like a cage. A soft whine escaped my throat, a sound of pure confusion and turmoil. "That's it," he whispered, his voice thick with a strained emotion. "Come back to me, Kalia." And then he did something that shattered my remaining defenses. He extended his hand, palm up, over the silver line, a blatant invitation. A gesture of complete trust. He knew I could rip his hand from his arm in a heartbeat, that the feral wolf was still a hair's breadth from control. But he offered it anyway. I stared at his hand, the scarred, powerful hand that had healed me, that had marked me, the hand that held my fate. Hesitantly, I leaned forward, my nose twitching as I scented his skin. The cold barrier of the silver was between us, but I could almost feel his heat. I stretched out my tongue and gave his fingertips a tentative lick. A jolt like lightning shot through both of us. The bond, which had been dampened by the silver, flared to life at the physical contact. I felt a wave of his emotions crash into me. Awe, relief, and a possessive desire so profound it was a physical ache. I stumbled back from the line, overwhelmed by the intensity of it. He slowly drew his hand back, his eyes never leaving mine. "You see," he murmured, "it is not a cage, it is a beginning." The ferocity of the shift was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. My powerful new body trembled with the aftershocks. My legs grew weak. I sank to the stone floor, my golden head resting on my paws, my luminous eyes still fixed on him. The fight was over. The wolf had submitted, not to the king, but to the mate. He stood up slowly. "Werewolf," he called, his voice now carrying its usual command. The heavy iron door creaked open. Werewolf stood there, his face grim. He took one look at me, a golden wolf lying exhausted in the center of the silver circle, and his eyes widened in shock and awe. "By the moon," he breathed. "Is it done?" Raiden asked, his back to his second. "The council is disbanded," Werewolf reported, his voice tight. "Two of the elders challenged your word. They no longer have a voice on the council." The implication was stark and brutal. Raiden had killed them to protect me. "The rest have fallen in line, for now. But they are terrified, Raiden. They saw your rage. They felt the backlash of her power, even from here. They know she is your mate. And it has broken the pack." "Packs can be mended," Raiden said dismissively. "Or new ones can be built from the ashes of the old." He finally turned to Werewolf. "I need fresh clothes for her, and food, meat, uncooked." His gaze flickered back to me, a softness entering his eyes that no one else was meant to see. "She will be hungry," Werewolf nodded, his expression troubled but loyal. "And what is her status, Alpha? The pack will need to know what to call her, how to address her." Raiden looked at me, lying in a pool of my own radiant light, a creature of legend, beautiful and broken. He had gone to war with his own counsel for me. He had stood as my anchor through the fire. He had offered his hand to a feral beast. He had claimed me with his words, with his mark, with his scent. But the final public claim had not yet been made. His gaze held mine, a silent question passing between the man and the wolf. He was not asking permission, but he was, for the first time, acknowledging the soul trapped within the beast. He turned his head slightly, his voice ringing with an authority that echoed through the stone chamber and out into the halls of the spire, a declaration meant to be heard by all, living and dead. "She is Kalia Solis Kael," he announced, his voice the sound of iron striking stone. "My mate, my Luna, and the future queen of this pack. Anyone who fails to show her the respect she is owed will answer to me directly." He paused, his stormy eyes locking with my golden ones, a final, unspoken vow passing between us. "Her word is my word. Her enemies are my enemies. The age of the moon has ended. Tonight begins the age of the moon and the sun." The declaration settled over the stone chamber, not with the weight of law, but with the finality of an earthquake. Kalia Solis Kel, my mate, my Luna, my queen. The names were a litany of possession, a crown of embers pressed onto my brow while I was still ash. In my wolf form, I understood the words on a primal level. He had bound my name to his, my bloodline to his, weaving my fate so tightly into his own that to tear one would be to unravel the other. The wolf inside me felt a surge of possessive pride. The pack had a Luna. It had me, but the shrinking, terrified human consciousness within the beast felt only the cold, hard weight of a gilded chain being locked around her neck. Werewolf, ever the loyal second, simply bowed his head. "It will be done, my queen," he said, his voice laced with a new, formal respect that felt as alien as my own fur. He backed out of the chamber, leaving us in the charged silence. Raiden didn't move. He watched me, his stormy eyes tracking every flicker of my ears, every subtle shift in my posture. He was reading a language I was only just beginning to learn myself. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, and the adrenaline of the shift was seeping away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I wanted to close my eyes, to sleep, to escape into a darkness where I wasn't a monster or a queen. My powerful wolf body trembled, and with a low whine, I laid my head back down on the stone, defeated by the sheer psychic weight of it all. "The shift back will be difficult the first time," he said, his voice soft, pulling me from the edge of oblivion. "It is a conscious act of will. You must remember the woman. You must want to be her again. Want to be her. The broken, betrayed girl who cried in his armchair. What was there to want? The wolf was power. The wolf was magnificent. He'd said so himself. It felt easier to stay this way, to let the instincts take over, to forget the pain of being human. "Kaliata," he said, his voice firmer now, a command. "Look at me." I lifted my heavy head. His gaze was intense, compelling. Do not lose yourself to the beast, he warned. The power of the soulless is a fire. It will feel good to burn, but you must be the one to command it, not the other way around. Find your anchor. Find the human. He took a step closer to the silver line. Find me. His words were a lifeline. He was right. Hiding in this form was an escape, but it was also a surrender. With a surge of will, I focused. I thought of my name, Kalia. I thought of the scent of old books, the feel of turning a crisp page, the taste of hot tea on a rainy afternoon, small simple things that made up a life I no longer had. And then I thought of him, his scent, the jolt of the bond, the impossible safety I felt in his arms, the way he had looked at me, not with fear, but with awe. I closed my golden eyes and reached for the pain. I summoned the memory of my bones breaking, but this time I willed them to move, to reverse the process. A tremor started in my paws, a deep shuddering vibration. It was not the explosive agony of before, but a painful, grinding pull, like a tide receding against its will. A low groan escaped my throat as my form began to flux, to shrink. My fur receded, my bones shortened and shifted. It was a horrible, unnatural feeling, like being turned inside out. I fell onto my side, no longer a wolf, but not yet a woman, a half-formed, vulnerable thing. The effort was too much. My will was faltering. Don't stop, Raiden's voice cut through the haze of pain. You are almost there. I felt him break the silver circle. The cold energy vanished, and his warmth, his power, rushed in to fill the void. He knelt beside me, and for the first time, he touched my changing skin. His hand on my back was a brand of searing heat, a jolt of pure energy. He wasn't just encouraging me, he was lending me his strength, pouring his own formidable will into mine. With a final gasping cry, the change completed. I was myself again, human, naked, trembling, and slick with sweat on the cold stone floor. The transition had left me utterly spent, more vulnerable than I had ever been in my life. Raiden immediately shrugged off his own dark shirt and wrapped it around me. It was still warm from his body and smelled intensely of him. He lifted me from the floor as if I weighed nothing, cradling me against his bare chest. His skin was hot, his muscles hard as stone beneath my cheek. The steady, powerful beat of his heart was a drum against my ear. He carried me from the shifting chamber, back into the opulent suite. He laid me gently on the enormous bed, the silken sheets cool against my heated skin. He didn't leave. He stood by the bed, his face unreadable in the dim light from the fire, his bare torso a landscape of coiled muscle and old silvery scars. He was waiting. I pulled his shirt tighter around me and finally found my voice. You had no right, I whispered, the words raw and brittle. His eyes narrowed. I had every right. You're my mate. You had no right to name me, I clarified, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. Kalia Solis Kale. You branded me with your name like I'm some prize you won in a fight with your elders. I branded you to keep you alive, he countered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. In our world, a name is a claim. It is a shield. As Kalia Solis, you are a rival, a threat to be neutralized. As Kalia Kael, you are part of me. To harm you is to declare war on me. I gave you my name not as a brand of ownership, but as a mantle of protection, the only one I have to offer. His logic was brutal and inescapable. He had tethered my survival to his own power. It was a cage, yes, but it was also the only thing keeping the other wolves at bay. I hated him for it, and a treacherous part of me, the part that still remembered the terror of the warehouse, was grateful. What happens now? I asked, pushing myself up to sit against the headboard. My new senses were still humming. I could smell the blood on his knuckles from his fight with the elders, the faint scent of Vareth's lingering loyalty in the air, the clean, cold smell of the approaching dawn outside the window. Now you become what I have declared you to be, he said. He walked over to the armchair where Vareth had left a neat pile of folded clothes. He brought them over, laying them on the bed. They were simple but exquisitely made, a soft tunic of dark gray wool, leather leggings, and fur-lined boots. The clothes of a wolf, not a bookstore clerk. You will dress, you will eat, and then you will come with me. Go with you where? I asked, my stomach twisting with a new dread. To the great hall, he said, his eyes like chips of flint. The pack has heard my decree. Now they will see their queen. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. No, I can't. They'll hate me. They'll see what I am. They will see what I tell them to see, he stated, his authority absolute. They will see my fated mate, the other half of my soul. They will see the golden wolf who survived a premature shift that would have killed a lesser creature. They will see power, and they will see that it belongs to me. He leaned down, his hands planting on the bed on either side of my legs, caging me in. His face was inches from mine, his stormy eyes boring into me. You will not show them fear, Kalia. You will show them nothing but the strength I know you possess. You are the last of the sun wolves, mated to the king of the moon. You are a living legend. Act like it. His words were harsh, a slap in the face, but beneath the command there was something else, a desperate, urgent belief. He saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. He wasn't just propping up a puppet queen, he was trying to forge a real one in the fires of his own conviction. After he left the room to give me privacy, I dressed. The clothes fit perfectly, molding to my body with a comfortable strength I'd never felt before. They felt like a costume, but they also felt right. When I was ready, he returned with a tray of food, slices of rare, bloody steak, and a goblet of dark, rich wine. My human sensibilities recoiled, but a deep, primal hunger rose from my stomach. The wolf was hungry. I ate, the savory taste of the meat satisfying a craving I never knew I had. When I was done, he stood and offered me his hand. It is time. I looked at his large, scarred hand. Taking it was an act of surrender, an acceptance of the role he had forced upon me, but not taking it, that was to remain a victim, a prisoner in his tower. With a deep breath that did little to calm my racing heart, I placed my trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong, a possessive, protective cage. He led me through the silent, imposing corridors of the spire. The guards we passed, hulking figures of immense power, averted their eyes and bowed their heads as one. They weren't just bowing to him, they were bowing to me. The scent of their fear and awe was a thick, cloying perfume in the air. We arrived before a set of massive doors carved with images of wolves hunting under a full moon. The sound from within was a low, rumbling murmur, the collective hum of hundreds of powerful predators packed into one space. "Do not let go of my hand," Raiden murmured, his voice a low vibration against my ear. "Keep your eyes forward. Look at no one and everyone. You are above them. You are their queen." The doors swung open. The great hall was a cavern of stone and shadow. A forest of black marble pillars held up a ceiling draped with ancient pack banners. A sky of faded wolf pelts and silver thread. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting flickering, dancing shadows. And it was full. Hundreds upon hundreds of wolves in their human forms stood gathered, a sea of hostile, curious, and terrified faces. Their eyes, all of them, snapped to me. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the room. The scent was overwhelming. 1,000 emotions crashing into me at once: fear, resentment, lust, awe, and a sharp, acidic spike of pure, unadulterated hatred from one corner of the room. I could hear the frantic beat of their hearts, the soft shuffle of their feet, the low, subliminal growls that rumbled in their chests. My instinct was to shrink, to hide behind Raiden, to disappear. But his grip on my hand tightened, a silent command. Strength. I lifted my chin, forced my shoulders back, and did as he said. I looked forward, my gaze sweeping over them as if they were nothing more than scenery. We walked down the central aisle, the pack parting before us like water before the prow of a ship. We ascended the dais at the far end of the hall, where a single, throne-like chair of carved obsidian sat. His throne. He led me to stand beside it, turning to face the silent, watching pack. He did not release my hand. "You have heard my decree." Raiden's voice boomed through the hall, a sound of pure, undisputed power that tolerated no dissent. "Behold your Luna, Kalia Solis Kael." A ripple of unease went through the crowd. Whispers slithered through the silence. Then a single voice, sharp and female, cut through the tension. "She is no Luna of mine." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was tall, beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, with hair as black as night and eyes the color of cold jade. She was clad in black leather, and the scent rolling off her was the one I'd noticed before, pure venomous hatred. "She is an abomination," the woman spat, her jade eyes fixed on me. "A sun witch. Her blood is a poison to this pack, a curse upon our sacred moon. You have brought a viper into our nest, my king, and you call her queen?" She sneered, her gaze raking over me with contempt. "I am Iskara, daughter of the elder you struck down. My blood is pure. My loyalty to this pack is proven. I say she is not worthy. I challenge the bond." A collective gasp went through the hall. To challenge a fated bond was the gravest of insults, a sacrilege. Ryden's body went rigid beside me, a low murderous snarl building in his chest. His power flared, a palpable wave of pressure that forced many in the hall to their knees. "You dare, Iskara?" he growled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried to every corner of the room. But before he could move, something happened inside me. The fear, the humiliation, the rage at Julian, the agony of the shift, the terror of this public display. It all coalesced into a single sharp point of pure, cold fury. Iskara had not just challenged him. She had challenged me. She had called me a viper, a curse, unworthy. The wolf, the soulless power that I had fought so hard to control, rose up not in a feral rage, but in a wave of chilling absolute authority. It was my bloodline she had insulted, my birthright. My hand, still held in Ryden's, grew impossibly hot. The mark on my wrist, hidden beneath my sleeve, blazed to life. A faint golden light began to bleed through the fabric. I met Iskara's hateful gaze, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a queen. A low growl rumbled in my chest, and it was not entirely human. My eyes, the simple brown of Kalia Veron, flashed for a brief, stunning instant with the molten gold of the soulless wolf. "Your challenge, Mampankin," I heard myself say, my voice steady, resonant, and utterly devoid of fear, "is accepted." The words hung in the stunned silence of the great hall, as shocking and unexpected as a thunderclap in a clear sky. "Your challenge is accepted." They were my words, spoken with my voice, yet they felt forged in a fire. I was only just beginning to understand. The pack stared, their collective shock a palpable wave. They had expected me to cower behind their king. They had expected him to strike Iskara down for her insolence. No one, least of all Ryden, had expected the quiet, unknown creature at his side to answer the challenge herself. Ryden's head snapped down to look at me, his stormy eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, fury, and a startling blaze of pride. His grip on my hand, which had been a cage of protection, became a vice. "Kalia, no," he growled, his voice a low, urgent command, meant only for me. "This is not your fight. This is a matter of pack law, my law." I met his gaze without flinching. The golden light from my wolf's eyes had receded, but the power behind them had not. "She challenged the bond," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "The bond is half mine. She challenged me. You taught me to show them strength. Is this not strength?" For a breathless moment, a silent, furious battle of wills was waged between us. King and queen, Alpha and Luna, sun and moon. He was used to absolute obedience. His word was final. But he was also staring into the eyes of his fated mate, a creature of equal, if different, power, who was refusing to be a pawn in her own destiny. The wolf in him roared at the danger I was placing myself in. But the king saw the political genius of the move. By accepting the challenge, I wasn't just defending my honor, I was legitimizing my claim in a way his decree never could. I was proving I was more than just his possession. I was a power in my own right. He released my hand. The act was a concession, a surrender, a transfer of authority that sent a ripple of astonishment through the watching pack. He took half a step back, a subtle, deliberate movement that ceded the floor to me. He was allowing it, trusting me. Iskara, who had been momentarily stunned, recovered with a cruel, confident smirk. She had expected to provoke the king, to paint him as a tyrant ruled by his lusts for an outsider. My acceptance was an unexpected gift, a chance to eliminate me herself and be hailed as a hero. "A challenge of blood," Iskara declared, her voice ringing with triumph. "To first blood, the loser yields her claim and submits to the victor's judgment." Does the little sun witch agree to the terms? I agree, I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had no idea what a challenge of blood entailed. I had no training, no weapon, no experience in this savage world. I had only the raw, untamed power of the soulless wolf humming in my veins and a desperate, burning refusal to be seen as weak. Iskara's smirk widened. Then let us begin. She began to unbuckle the leather armor she wore, preparing for a fight. No, Raiden's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. He had not intervened. But he would still dictate the terms. He stepped forward, his presence reasserting its dominance over the hall. Not a challenge of blood, a challenge of will. A murmur of confusion went through the crowd. Iskara's face fell, her confidence faltering. What is the meaning of this? The rites demand blood. I am the king, I make the rites, Raiden stated, his voice laced with cold iron. He pointed a finger at Iskara, his eyes promising a painful death if she defied him. You claim her blood is a poison. You claim she is unworthy to be Luna. This is a challenge not of strength but of legitimacy, of a wolf's very soul. He turned his gaze to sweep across the entire pack. Our Luna has a power you do not understand. A power of the sun. Not just the moon. She will not meet you with claw and tooth. He turned back to Iskara, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. It was a terrifying sight. You will stand before her. You will meet her gaze, and you will attempt to force her to her knees with the weight of your will alone. If you can make her submit, you have won. But if she breaks you first. He let the threat hang in the air, more potent than any direct promise of violence. It was a brilliant, dangerous gamble. He was banking everything on my untamed, unknown power. A physical fight, I would have lost in seconds. But a contest of pure will, of soul-deep power. He was betting that the last daughter of the soulless line was more than a match for a common pack wolf, no matter how ambitious. Iskara's face paled. She was a warrior, skilled in physical combat. This was a battle on a field she did not understand, against a foe whose capabilities were a complete unknown. But to refuse now, after her bold challenge, would be to admit defeat, to brand herself a coward. I accept, she stammered, her bravado cracking. Then begin, Raiden commanded, stepping back once more to stand. Beside the obsidian throne, a silent, brooding judge. The pack cleared a space on the floor of the hall, forming a wide circle around us. The air was thick with tension, with the scent of fear and anticipation. I stood alone in the center of the vast, intimidating space, facing the venomous wolf who wanted to destroy me. This was my true first shift. Not the agony of changing form, but the transformation from victim to combatant. Iskara strode into the circle, her jade eyes burning with a desperate fury. She planted her feet, her entire body radiating an aura of aggression and dominance. A low subliminal growl started in her chest, a psychic pressure designed to intimidate, to force submission from a lesser wolf. It felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my shoulders, a command to bow my head, to expose my throat. The Kalia from the bookstore would have crumpled to the floor, but the wolf within me bristled at the challenge. It recognized the tactic, the crude application of pack hierarchy, and it was insulted. I did not growl back. I did not try to match her aggressive posture. I simply stood my ground, breathed in, and did what Raiden had told me to do in the shifting chamber. I reached inside myself for the fire. I found the core of light, the captured piece of the dawn that lived in my blood. I did not unleash it in a feral rage. Instead, I let it flow through me, a current of calm, inexorable power. I let it fill my eyes. The faint golden glow returned, but this time it was not a flicker. It was a steady, luminous burn. I met Iskara's hateful gaze, and I did not see an enemy. I saw a soul. I could see the bitter jealousy that ate at her, the gnawing ambition, the grief for her father that she had twisted into a weapon of hate. I saw the darkness in her, and I met it not with a greater darkness, but with an overwhelming light. Iskara flinched as if struck. The pressure she was exerting faltered. My aura was not aggressive. It was absolute. It was the calm, undeniable authority of the sun rising. It does not demand the darkness flee. It simply banishes it by its very nature. She snarled, redoubling her efforts. The psychic weight intensified. I could feel the probe of her will against my own, searching for a crack, a weakness, a flicker of fear. She was trying to dominate my wolf. But my wolf was not of the moon. Her lunar-based dominance had no purchase on it. It was like trying to command the tide to stop the sun from rising. My power was different, alien to her, and it terrified her. I took a single, deliberate step forward. Iskara stumbled back, a gasp escaping her lips. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The confident warrior was gone, replaced by a woman facing a power far beyond her comprehension. My golden eyes were not just looking at her. They were seeing through her, illuminating every dark and petty corner of her soul. "You think the bond is a weakness," I said, my voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. It was imbued with the resonant power of the Solis line. "You see a king chained to an outsider. I see a kingdom that has spent centuries in the cold moonlight, finally being offered the warmth of the sun. You see a threat. I see a balance." I took another step. The golden light emanating from me intensified, casting a warm, luminous glow around me. The pack wolves stared in awe and terror. They were creatures of the moon, and they were standing in the presence of a living embodiment of their celestial opposite. "You challenge my worthiness?" I continued, my voice gaining strength. "My only crime is that I exist. My blood is not a poison, it is merely different. And you are afraid of what you do not understand." Iskara was trembling now, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't break my gaze, trapped by the sheer force of my will. Her own power was like a candle trying to outshine a star. It was being consumed, overwhelmed. "Look at your king, Iskara," I commanded, my voice ringing with an authority I never knew I possessed. "Look at your alpha." Her gaze, against her will, flickered to Raiden. He stood by the throne, a statue carved from shadow and fury, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes, his stormy gray eyes, were fixed only on me, and in their depths, for all the pack to see, was not the cold calculation of a monarch. There was raw, unguarded awe. There was fierce, boundless pride. And there was a deep, soul-shaking surrender. He was not my keeper. He was my consort. In that moment, the entire pack understood. I was not a weapon he wielded. I was the other half of his crown. The realization broke Iskara. With a choked sob, she fell to her knees. Her head bowed, her hands pressed to the stone floor. She had not been beaten. She had been undone. Her hatred, her ambition, it all dissolved in the face of a power she could not fight, a truth she could not deny. She had challenged the bond, and the bond itself had answered. I yield," she whispered, the words a ragged admission of defeat. "Mercy, my queen." The silence in the hall was absolute. I had won. I had faced the hatred of the pack, and I had conquered it not with violence, but with the very essence of what I was. I stood over the kneeling form of my challenger, the golden light slowly receding back into me, leaving me feeling strangely hollow, yet incredibly strong. I looked to Raiden. His face was unreadable, but I could feel the roaring triumph of his wolf through the bond, a wave of pure, possessive pride that washed over me and steadied my trembling legs. I turned my attention back to the kneeling woman. I could demand her life. I could banish her as Raiden had banished Julian. That was the law of the challenge. That was the way of the wolf. But I was not just a wolf. I was a woman who had once found solace in the quiet mercy of stories. "Get up," I said, my voice clear and steady. Iskara looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with fear, expecting a death sentence. "Your father's seat on the council is empty," I stated, the words coming to me as if from a dream. "You are his heir. You are a warrior of this pack. Your loyalty was misplaced. Your grief was weaponized by fear. The pack needs strength, not division. It needs warriors, not martyrs." I took a deep breath, making a decision that would either solidify my rule or doom it entirely. Take your father's seat, serve your pack, serve your alpha, and serve your Luna. Your challenge has been answered. Let there be no more talk of poison and curses in this hall, only loyalty. A stunned gasp went through the crowd. I had not only defeated her, I had pardoned her. More than that, I had elevated her. It was an act of mercy so profound, so alien to their brutal politics, that it left them speechless. I turned my back on Iskara and walked toward the dais, toward my king. He watched me approach, his stormy eyes burning with an emotion so intense it stole the air from my lungs. When I reached him, he took my hand, not in a grip of ownership, but with a reverence that made my heart ache. He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the back of it, a futile gesture of fealty from a king to his queen, for all his pack to see. He leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear, his voice a low, ragged whisper that was meant only for me. "I have ruled this pack for a century through fear and strength," he murmured, his breath hot against my skin. "And you, Kalia Solis Kael, you have conquered it in a single night with a power I never knew existed." He pulled back, his eyes searching mine, the last of his defenses crumbling. The king was gone, and only the man, the wolf, the mate remained. "I thought I was chaining you to my throne. I was wrong. It is my soul that is chained to yours." 6 months had passed since the night of the challenge. 6 months since the great hall had bowed to a queen of sunlight and mercy. The city below the spire was draped in the velvet cloak of a warm summer night, the endless grid of lights a softer, more peaceful constellation than it had been in the winter. I sat on the wide stone balcony of our suite, a thick, leather-bound book open in my lap. It was a collection of old myths, tales of moon gods and sun goddesses, of eternal rivalries and fated loves. The scent of night-blooming jasmine drifted up from the gardens below, a sweet, heady perfume that mingled with the familiar, comforting scent of Ryden that now clung to everything I owned. The heavy glass door slid open, and he stepped out onto the balcony, moving with a silent grace that still sometimes took my breath away. He had shed the formal trappings of his day as king and wore only a pair of simple black trousers. The moonlight traced the silvery paths of his scars I now knew the story of, each one a testament to a long, brutal, and lonely life as Alpha King. He looked tired, the weight of his rule a tangible thing in the set of his broad shoulders. He didn't speak, simply came to stand behind the chaise where I sat, his large hands coming to rest on my shoulders. His touch was no longer a claim or a brand, but a question, a comfort. I leaned back against his powerful frame, my head resting against his chest. I could feel the slow, steady drum of his heart, a rhythm that had become the baseline of my new life. "Reading again?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. He dipped his head, his nose brushing against my hair, inhaling my scent. It was a gesture I had come to cherish, a quiet act of centering himself after a long day of ruling a kingdom of predators. "It's the story of a wolf who fell in love with a star," I said, my finger tracing the gilded letters on the page. "He howled for her every night, but he could never reach her." "A foolish wolf," Ryden said, his hands sliding down my arms to wrap around me, pulling me more securely against him. "He should have torn down the sky." I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that had once been so rare. Spoken like a true Alpha King. He rested his chin on the top of my head, and we fell into a comfortable silence, watching the city breathe below us. So much had changed. The woman who had shivered in the suite, a terrified prisoner in a borrowed coat, felt like a ghost from another life. The mark on my wrist, once a symbol of my bondage, now pulsed with a soft, familiar warmth against his skin, a constant, living connection between our souls. I sometimes thought of Julian. The memory no longer brought a searing agony, but a distant, hollow pity. He was a creature of shadow and ambition, a man who had seen power in my blood, but had been blind to the truth of it. I had heard whispers that he hadn't lasted a week in the Barrens, that the rogues had torn him apart. His fairy tale had been a lie, but it had been the catalyst for a truth more profound than any story I had ever read. My rule as Luna was unlike any the pack had ever known. Ryden's power was the moon, cold, absolute, and commanding of fear and respect. Mine was the sun. I had spent my first months on the council not making demands, but listening. I had established places of healing for those injured in pack disputes, created a system for the Omegas and the lowest-ranking members to voice their grievances without fear of retribution. I had brought warmth and light into the shadowed corners of their brutal society. Iskara, true to my command, had taken her father's seat. The hatred in her jade eyes had been replaced by a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She had become the captain of my personal guard, a warrior who would die before she let any harm come to the queen who had shown her a mercy she had never expected. my act of grace had not been seen as weakness. It had been seen as a display of a different, more formidable kind of power. It had forged a loyalty that fear could never command. "The river pack sends their fealty," Raiden said quietly, his voice pulling me from my reverie. "They heard about how you settled the border dispute with the Mountain Clan, not with threats of war, but with a trade agreement and a shared hunting ground. They said they have never seen such a thing." He paused, his voice thick with an emotion he still rarely showed to anyone but me. "I have spent centuries ruling by the sword, Kalia. You are teaching them a new way. You are teaching me a new way." I turned in his embrace, my hands coming up to cup his scarred, handsome face. The Alpha King, the feared beast of the city, looked down at me with an unguarded love that still made my heart ache. His stormy eyes, which had once held only power and loneliness, were now clear and deep. "And you," I said softly, my thumb tracing the line of the scar on his jaw, "taught me how to be a wolf. You were my anchor in the fire. You held me together when I would have shattered into 1,000 pieces." He leaned down and captured my lips in a kiss that was no longer about a primal, fated bond, but about a deep and abiding love. It was a kiss of equals, of partners, of two halves of a soul that had finally, after centuries of waiting, found their whole. The taste of him was a heady mix of power and tenderness, a flavor that was entirely my own. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. "I never knew what this was," he whispered, his voice raw. "This peace. For so long, the bond was just a story, a legend of a key that would unlock more power. I never knew it was the key to unlocking this." The wolf within me, the golden beast of the sun, stirred in agreement, recognizing the deep contentment in her mate. His own wolf answered, a low purring growl that vibrated through his chest and into mine. They were as much in love as the man and woman who housed them. He took my hand and led me to the edge of the balcony. We stood side by side, his arm wrapped firmly around my waist, and looked out at our kingdom. The fairy tale I thought I wanted, with the charming billionaire in the perfect suit, had been a story written on paper, fragile and easily burned. A lie. But this was real. This life, forged in betrayal and blood, in fire and shadow, was true. The monster I had feared becoming was simply the other half of myself, the half that had been sleeping, waiting for her king, her mate, her moon. Raiden's hand tightened on my waist. A silent vow, a promise of 1,000 more nights like this one. In the heart of the monster, beside the scarred and lonely king, I had not been consumed or caged. I had finally come home.